Stop laughing at me.
I can't see.
Okay, hold on. What's happening?
I feel like
Okay,
this happens every time we start.
Zoom is not responding.
Zoom has had enough also.
Zoom is done with our bullshit.
I don't blame Zoom. I am too. I'm just kidding.
What is happening? I'm gonna have to close this and open it back up again.
Okay. Welcome to Coffee Break Classroom, brewed for higher ed, where teaching meets good vibes. We're just two friends chopping it up. Here you can expect a blend of ridiculous classroom stories, a little educational research, and some practical teaching techniques. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's talk teaching without the grading.
We're back.
Hey!
You gotta put up one of those technical difficulties
Siri
things.
like the bee.
We need to make one of the two of us that is just standing like we have little cartoon drawings that are just like, we'll be right back. It's
I bet there's a AI that will cartoonify us real easy.
uh probably, but
Yeah, but I think before we get started, we need to acknowledge that it is the last week of our semester and it is
yeah.
before next week is finals week. And I feel like my soul has been dragged through the mud. And I submitted today our chapter for our accreditation. It was the second draft, and I am tired, like at a cellular level.
At least you get the benefit of mud. I feel like I've been dragged through like gravel. So
Mud is has a higher water concentration than gravel usually, so that's good.
like one of those old timey playgrounds that were like tiny rocks.
Hey, I played on those
So did
playgrounds.
I.
Oh, okay.
They didn't make them like little foam chopped up foam pieces until after my time. So
When my kids were young or old enough to go to playgrounds, I like there were things there I didn't know what you were supposed to do on them. Like I think they were supposed to inspire creativity in the way that a metal slide did not. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So, with that energy, we'd like to welcome you back to our sixth episode of Coffee Break Classroom.
brewed for higher ed.
Boom. And what a delightful time it is to be in higher ed.
Yeah, that's true. And I also want to say, Christina, I think you look great this morning.
Oh, Christina, those earrings, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Uh,
I talked to
we
Christina today about that she got fun earrings because it seemed more versatile than getting a tattoo. And so
That's true.
it's
You
true.
can change your earrings very easily.
Tattoos, not so much.
Today we're going to be talking about mindset.
We are. We are. So what so the two types of general mindsets that we talk about in education and psychology are growth mindset and fixed mindset. So what do you think when you hear those terms, Ben?
I think about fixed mindset. It's kind of like those students who are just like, oh, I'm a B student or I'm not good at math. I'm not good at this. Rather than someone who has a growth mindset who thinks that I can't do this yet, right? They can kind of see the opportunity in the challenge that is presented and know that eventually it's something that they'll be able to understand.
Yes, that with the right support and the right effort, their abilities at math or at dancing or at art, they are all capable of improving. I totally agree.
Yeah, I just want to ask too, like, have you done many presentations or talks about mindset before?
So I've done it in like workshops with faculty. And our teaching and learning center at school did a year where the theme was ditching deficit based mindset, which is kind of a mindset term that's used when people are focusing on what they don't have rather than the assets and strengths they bring to a situation. But no, this is actually my first mindset, like just focus professional development. How about you?
Yeah, same. Agreed. I really wanted to say that like I'm not an expert. I haven't done a lot of research in this area. I've read a lot of stuff and engaged in a lot of professional development. But there's definitely a lot of resources out there,
Yes.
especially that I found today because I was trying to find this article that I ran with some learning assistants back in like 2019, and I was trying to search for it. I'm like, there's so much out there
Yes.
about the impact of growth mindset just in terms of like closing equity gaps and all of those kinds of things as well that I was like not aware of. I'm like, oh, I
Yes.
don't feel like we can talk about this, but you know what? This is part of the learning process.
I'm going to pretend like I was also not doing research up until about 10 minutes before we started this podcast, because there really is such a burgeoning wealth of literature on growth mindset. Which I will freely admit, about 3 years ago, I read the book by Carol Dweck, Mindset, and I was like, Eureka! This explains so many things and it's so powerful. And I was so late to the party that anytime I tried to talk to someone about it, they were like, yeah, no kidding. And I was like, oh. Well, it was new to me. I had, I was growing.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I actually think that you must put a lot, and I do too, of importance on growth mindset. And I think that actually ties back a lot into some of your grading practices.
True.
But why do you think that a growth mindset is important? Both for, and maybe you don't have to answer both of these, but it's important for strong students as well as weak students.
Yeah.
Academically, not like in terms of raw manpower.
I don't know if anybody was thinking about it in terms of
Oh, they
actual
were.
strength.
They were.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
that's fair. I think it's important for all of our students, like strong students and weak students, in the sense that, like for students who would maybe self-ident, I don't even like putting those labels on students. Like I have had faculty members that are say that like, oh, like our students are weak students, and I'm
Yep.
like, that's not. No, like we don't have weak students. We have students who haven't been given the opportunity or time to succeed yet. Like
Yes.
that's my mentality when we come to that. So I kind of reject the supposition of your question. Um,
We're starting off strong today.
but I think it's important, and I was actually just talking about this with my students today too. It improves success, like regardless of whether or not you're a strong student or a weak student. It lets our strong, I'm putting quotes on this if you can't tell with my tone, strong students know that like they can have bad days, right?
Yep.
Like it doesn't make them a bad student. Um, it also just gives it gives all students an opportunity to show us that they can succeed. It can reduce their stress just to kind of have that mindset of not needing to be held to those high performance standards all of the time, that you have a chance to get there. And that also goes along with then increasing persistence, because if we can get our students to have a growth mindset, they're not going to give up as soon as they hit the first challenge.
Yes. Yes. I think that I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that it embraces the idea that mistakes are part of the process. I think so. I think you can have students who struggle academically to be successful, and so you can have students who, the example you used earlier, like I'm not a math person or I'm not a writing person, which is a routine thing to hear. But then you can also have strong students who come in, academically strong students who have been historically successful in their classes, right? And they come to college, and the first exam maybe they take, they don't do nearly as well. They were only A or B. I mean, I don't know how many times I've had emails from students that are like, I'm an A student and we need to figure out what's going on here. But,
Really?
yes, very assertive,
Okay.
very assertive. But how do you reset after you've failed an exam, um,
Hmm.
you botched a performance, like just something hasn't gone right. I think the ability for students to recover emotionally, mentally, and be able to move forward is super important to their, you mentioned their persistence and their retention and their success, but it's not something that is just a school type skill. Like that
Right.
is, generalizable across life.
That's exactly what I was thinking about in terms of our students who have a history of strong academic performance. That like when they meet the first challenge, if they've never really felt challenged, like falling apart,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
So, do you have any stories of young Ben as a student who struggled with something, or not even necessarily a student?
Oh no, no, just,
Wow.
it's so funny. I do. Yeah, I just think that I've always been a really hard worker, and I think that's probably part of growing up on a farm is just like you do it until it's done and you get it.
Yep.
And you get what you need to until and I've always just kind of followed through on that. And I do like remember getting like a 40 on a test in college at one point
Yeah.
and then being like, "Oh, the average was a 34." I'm like, "Okay, so that probably was not like entirely me. That was the problem in that situation." But like seeing that as just a what do we do now, right? Rather than this is the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, when I was a second semester geology major, the cute boy in my dorm was in my historical geology class. And I know this is a personal story. And oh my God, I thought he was so cute. And he was my lab partner. And where he fell a little short was that he was not, in fact, good at geology at all. And he was not the best lab partner for me to have. And so I probably spent the first third of my historical geology class, like, just struggling. I was in there taking cuts, taking swings at every lab and just striking out. And I remember my professor just kind of read my like answer to something and just deep sigh, shake of the head, and just shuffled away. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. Like, and I had this moment where for like a couple weeks, I was like, maybe I'm not supposed to be a geologist. And my mom was like, well, you're doing really well in math class. Maybe you should be a math major. And I was like, I don't want to do math, Mom. And I had to pull myself out of that lab partner situation and I had to kind of figure out what I knew, what I didn't know. And by the end of the semester, I hit like a stride, but it was probably a good half of the semester where I was like, what should my major be? If I can't be a geologist, like, can I be an elementary education major? And then I was like, I
Hmm.
don't really like kids that much, so I don't think that's a good choice. But it was a lesson that I had to learn, and it was a good lesson in self-reliance and on choosing more appropriate lab partners, I will say. So
So funny.
it's true. It's real life. So I think a lot of times we can, in all areas of life, again, think about reframing things that happen.
Hmm.
So you were talking about your 40 on your test.
Yeah.
And so, or my struggling in my class. And I think that if you think about things in not the way that like this is happening to you as a way in more of a way this is happening for you and what is the
Hmm.
lesson, I think can be a good way to kind of look at mistakes or failure or something as a way to think about it in terms of growth.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Kind of along the lines of what I was saying in terms of like acknowledging that the thing happened and what do you need to do now to like move forward.
Yes.
I think that's just kind of always the way that I've been, which is annoying and not good content. So sorry.
Wow. So boring. I have so many examples here of triumph over adversity. I some of not all of them are mine, um, but some of them
I
are.
think I'm also just not good on the spot. So
Oh.
it's hard for me to think about those things. But I also have just always been an overachiever. So, I mean, we talked about in our origin episode,
Sure.
just both being valedictorian, but then
Yes.
I basically had straight 4.0s in my undergrad, except for two classes.
Wow.
Um, and I think I only got one A- in grad school. So sorry,
Wow. Well, that's okay. You can be bad at other things that aren't necessarily school related.
that's true. I'm bad at crocheting.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to tell everyone. That's embarrassing.
I just started learning last year, and this is one of the things that I talk about because one of the studying bites that I do with my students is about making mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and how to be comfortable making mistakes and just being excited about your first attempts, right?
Uh-huh.
That's a good growth mindset type of thing. I created a really bad square.
Oh, like a
It,
granny square?
I was just trying to just make a square, just get used to doing lines, and it
Okay.
just became a trapezoid.
That does happen. That does happen.
Too much tension
Gotta
apparently.
relax. It's supposed to be
'Cause I'm
relaxing.
so stressed out about trying to make sure I get this through.
Oh my
So,
God.
right, but I think just I didn't really give up. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna leave this one here. We're gonna start over. We're gonna see like how this goes, and being able to unwind and take a couple steps back
Mm-hmm.
and be able to just kind of go through it again and look at the difference, see how the way that I'm doing things changes the outcome
Mm-hmm.
and being able to kind of modulate that. So I
Yeah.
think that, there you go. I am bad at crocheting
That
for
is a
now.
mortal sin, I believe.
For now.
For now, exactly, exactly. So some of the studies on like growth mindset are insane. Where I heard about it, I was listening to another podcast today, and they were talking about this study where there were, I think it was a 10th grade class, and they gave them two sessions about like 25 minutes each on growth mindset. And it was very formulaic, but it impacted their mindset and then their like success rates in classes for like more than a year, which is
Hmm.
wild. But it really does, because it is the way that you think, impact like long term outcomes. And so I was thinking, actually, you just brought up earlier that one of your colleagues made a statement about the weak students that we
Hmm.
sometimes, weak quote unquote students that we have. So I wonder how you think instructor mindset can influence success for a student.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking even along the lines of having as an instructor, having a growth or fixed mindset can change your whole perception of the class and of students. Like not
Mm-hmm.
even how students are interacting with the class, but just about how you are going to interact with students.
Yeah.
Because if you are going in thinking that all students are weak, you're or they're you even as an instructor can be like, oh, these students are just bad at math. They don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to reframe it goes back to some of the things that we were talking about in one of the earlier episodes of can't do versus don't do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are looking at students as weak students, they're like, they can't do this. But if you are looking at it from a growth mindset, saying that, like, my students are not able to do this now, like, why?
Mm-hmm.
And then what can I do to get them there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can really do a lot for you as an instructor and also just help you calm down. We
Yeah.
have so many instructors who get so stressed out about, like, students can't do this. Students don't, like, they can't. They're just bad. They're weak. And I'm like, no, bad. Stop.
So I find that frustrating when, so when we talk about like the post-COVID generation, right? Which I've been teaching long enough that I don't know if it's a generational turnover or it is like, I think it is crazy for people to not think that students who were largely in their home during 2 years of time when like are hugely important years, right? Your teen years are like dog years, like everyone's 7 years. And that there should be no impact on students. like and they'll say, well, these students aren't good at math, they don't want to do homework, they don't want to talk, like all
Hmm.
of the they don't have any resilience, they all want to copy and paste, they, right, is like students is a monolith.
Hmm.
And I think that that to me is like super fixed mindset, because it's like, but what an opportunity we have as instructors to help students with whatever they learn different skills when they were at home. And so how can we leverage those skills to strengthen some other skills that they didn't have the opportunity to practice?
Yeah. I think we could probably do a whole episode on strength-based approach to like education, but mindset-wise, like even just reframing some of the things that you were saying, like students don't talk to each other. Not that they can't talk to each other. They aren't talking to each other. So like what are you going to do about that? Like
Right.
stop.
Yes.
And this goes like there was a little bit of this too that I was seeing. It's not just fixed mindset versus growth mindset, but there's also about the locus of control. Like, is it internal or external? And so like you can come in with like a fixed mindset where everything is like external, like control, like you don't have any control over it and it's not going to change, versus like having an internal growth mindset of like, I can do something about this and we can have a different outcome, and just kind of looking at the interaction between where the control is. And I think going back to your question about how having a growth mindset can help students, are you talking about the instructor's growth mindset, or are you talking about the students having a growth mindset?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes, I think you need both. I think you need both.
Right. And so step one is like, as an instructor, get your shit together. Step, if you, and I think people listening to this podcast are probably in the category of growth mindset. You might have like find yourself in the position of having said some of the things that Amanda listed out a
We've
little bit ago.
we've all had our moments.
We've been there. It's not like I haven't felt those things too. I just have gotten really good at trying to reframe things and thinking about what I can do differently. I forgot where I was going.
Well, you were talking about deficit-based mindset for instructors, and your frustration with the way that people sometimes talk about students.
Yeah.
So my first semester back from COVID, I had a small class, and they refused to work together. And active learning is a really big part of my classes. Especially, this was a second level. I think this was my geology of the national parks class, which is so fun. And even now I have a quiet class, which I'm not sure is super different from the way this class showed up, where I would hand out assignments and I would pair them up. I would pair them with different people. I would have them do fun activities that had nothing to do with like school, just so that they would have opportunities to interact with each other,
Socialize.
socialize.
Hmm.
And they were very polite and they did everything I asked. And when they were done doing what I asked, they stopped talking and then they sat there, or they would work in parallel and not talk to each other. Same worksheet, same assignment, same activity, no conversation, just sitting.
Hmm.
And so it took me like 10 or 11 weeks, and I was so frustrated with myself afterwards. But like to think of giving each pair one piece of paper, like, because then they had to talk to each other. And it was so nice. And I was like, why did it take me so long to think of this? But I don't know. Sometimes you need a moment to just sit to figure out. Well, I was trying other things. I was like, let's do fun. Okay, fun's not working. Let's do fix
And
the mistake. Yeah.
that's a big part of being able to have a growth mindset, is just flexibility,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things that we can do that can communicate growth mindset in the classroom and kind of help students develop that is just being flexible ourselves, being able to pivot, being able to adjust, recognizing when something isn't working and making some changes,
Yes.
having that communication. And I think showing students that we are doing that as the people who are models
Mm-hmm.
for them can help encourage that among them themselves.
Yeah. What are some ways that you communicate to your students that you have a growth mindset, both for yourself and for them?
Sure. I think a lot of it is built into the way I structure my class in terms of like retakes are the core facet of what it is that I do. Acknowledging that if you don't understand something in week 3, like you have a chance to still demonstrate to me that you understand that content. And I think that's a big piece of what I do that communicates a growth mindset.
So, can I ask you to
Oh, go ahead.
no? Can I ask you to expand on that just a little bit and tell our huge audience when you say retakes, you mean like exam retakes or quiz
Yeah,
retakes?
I have exam and quiz retakes built in for almost all of the exams and quizzes that I do in my classroom. We'll do a talk. We'll do a podcast. I'm doing a talk later for MCC, but we are doing a podcast episode later. We have one planned for that presentation, which is really it's called Teaching Human Speed,
Yeah.
less rush, more reach, and thinking about how to restructure your classroom based around learning and being able to remanage that, making sure you're hitting your learning outcomes. And so I did a lot of that work in order to build in these retakes for my course because that was a huge growth is one of the things that I value significantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually tell my students that in my course information sheet. It's actually right at the top. After I introduce them to physics, I'm like, I do things differently than you will probably see in a lot of other classes because I'm an education researcher, so I have this kind of background in terms of pedagogy and I also like these are the things that I value and growth is one of the top things on the list there.
Cool. So, you mentioned study bites earlier. I was wondering if there's anything you do with your class between when you first give them a quiz or an exam and a retake.
Yes. I even before we hit the first exam, so the week of the first exam, I talk about dealing with test anxiety and we go through and talk about some different tips to get prepared for an exam. When you're in the exam, what are you going to do after the exam? And the one that I do immediately the next week when I hand the exams back is about how to make corrections and using corrections for learning purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about how to, you've just gotten some feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another thing of growth mindset, right, is providing feedback in a way that's going to encourage students to come back and improve.
Mm-hmm.
So giving feedback, I've given you feedback. What can you do with that? Here's a good way to kind of go through and reapproach the problem with like your understanding of what went wrong, keep some detailed notes, that kind of stuff. So that is something that I talk about with them.
So, when you're talking about when they first get, like, what sort of things do you, in terms of test anxiety, because that's something that is widely reported among students. So, what do you tell them about when you hand out the test? Like, how do they
Yeah.
manage that?
So the anxiety that you're talking
Yes,
about,
yes.
okay, I'm totally not like filling
No, you're doing
time
fine.
while I'm opening up the file so I can take a look at what I have written down. So
That's okay.
I have a couple different things here. One of my biggest things with test anxiety is the fact that there are a lot of websites that if you go to them to get test anxiety help, they'll say, well, be prepared. And it's like, you can be the most prepared person in the world, but that might not mean anything if you have like really severe anxiety. So actually my
Yes.
version of that is like, make a plan. Like make a plan is different than be prepared.
Okay. So, what does
It's
a
like you
plan
have
look
a,
like?
yeah. So I talk to my students about if you have, they're going to have an equation sheet. If there's some extra ideas or something that you want to make sure that you remember, like when you get the test, write them down at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's one of the things like that would be part of make a plan, right? Like
Yep.
know what you're going to do as soon as you get the test. Know how you're going to go through and approach the test. Look at the whole page first, get something on the page.
Yep. Skim the test to
Have
see. Yeah.
yeah, have a little mantra or checklist of things to remember. So for example, like check your signs, check your setup, check your arrows, right? Like if they just want to repeat that to themselves, like when they get
Okay.
done with a problem, they can repeat that to
Oh,
themselves.
'cause that's a
And
very
then they
physics
like
specific thing. I was
it
like, what the hell are you talking about?
correct, right. Do I have my vector arrows in the right direction? Do I have the right signs? Like
Yes.
that kind of stuff. So like things to check. And I give them a couple relaxation techniques too to kind of help. So I don't know if that answers your
It
question.
does. It does. One of the studies that I came across talked about how your body has like a biological response to stress,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how prepared you are. A test is still can be an anxiety-inducing event. And so, going back to what we were saying about reframing, you can reframe your body's biological response to stress. So a lot of times students feel like, you're breathing fast, your heart is pounding as a way to that, like that is ensuring their demise. Like this is it. I can feel myself getting tense. This always happens to me before a test. I'm not going to do well. And instead reframing your biological stress into a way that it's actually your body enhancing your ability to do well. Like your body is breathing faster because you're taking in more oxygen to, go right to your brain. So by reframing that stress as like your body is ready to fight and be successful, which I didn't think about, but is a good way for students. Like I just, the more we talk about things, reframing, it just becomes like reframing and focusing on your why and things like that. I just feel like are things that we end up hitting every episode. But
Yeah, reframing is a huge part of a growth mindset
yeah.
because it's again recognizing you're able to do it. I actually did have one of my study bites I wanted to talk about that I did today with my students, and I was like, "What auspicious timing!" My study bite for this week was about acknowledging your success, right? And how that can actually help you with studying. Because when we're constantly learning new content, it's really easy to feel like we're not making progress
Sure.
because you're constantly struggling and you're
Yes.
constantly in this struggle. So it can really feel like you're just walking around in a circle, not making progress,
Treading
right?
water.
But in reality, it's actually like an upward spiral,
That's
right?
cool.
Because you're coming, and I show this picture to them, and like, this is what we think our progress looks like. This is how it actually is. Because as you're coming back around to things, you are coming at them with a new perspective. You actually have learned and like worked with them, so you understand them a little bit more than you think. And it really look at the weekly structure of that in our course. And the retakes really help show that as well for our students is that you are struggling with this in week one, you put in some time and like it's a little bit better in week two, you understand it by week three. And when you look at one unit of content, like that really shows you the growth. But whereas like when we're constantly doing a new unit each week, like it doesn't feel
Like
like you're growing.
like you're always swimming upstream. Yeah.
Yeah. So I talked to them about how acknowledging growth, like and just acknowledging that they've grown can really help boost confidence, boost their perseverance because they realize that they've managed something challenging. And then acknowledging that makes the current challenge feel more doable, right? Because if
I've done this
you see what I'm
before.
saying?
Yes.
Yeah, because I have them. I put up the equation sheet on the board, and I'm like, remember when I showed you this at the beginning of the semester, and I told you you don't know what any of this is, probably.
Yep.
And I'm like, you can look at this now and probably tell me what all of those variable is. And I'm like, I hope. Please tell me you can all like
Right,
tell me
right.
what
We're all
all of
good.
those things are. Yeah, we're all good, right?
So
And
I
they can
go ahead.
look. Go ahead.
No, you finish up. Go.
I was gonna say they can look at that and see like I actually have learned things because I know what that is now. I know how to interpret that equation. And it pairs so nicely with the story I tell them at the beginning of the semester when I show them the equation sheet and I say, this probably looks like nonsense to you right now.
Yep.
Because when I was an undergrad, I remember walking into a classroom and there being a bunch of stuff on the board as like a first year student and seeing a bunch of things on the board that I had no idea what any of it meant. And then like 4 years later, actually walking into the same classroom, seeing a bunch of the stuff on the board and being like, oh, that's quantum mechanics. Like that's thermodynamics. Like being able to just acknowledge like that I recognize that, like it gives you that little bit of a boost
Totally.
to say, I did learn this. And so I have students think about something they struggled with that got easier. And I ask them to kind of share out some stuff.
That's
And then
awesome.
I ask them to think about what they are struggling with now and what that might look like in another couple weeks with a little bit more practice.
That's pretty perfect. So I have a story of triumph over adversity that I was thinking of when I was, and it's not mine, when I was thinking about today. So when my daughter Chloe was in elementary school, she had undiagnosed ADHD, which many kids have. But when she was in kindergarten and first grade, we would have my ex-husband and I would have monthly meetings with her principal, a school psychologist, her teacher, and some other guy who would make graphs. And what he made graphs of was I'm not even kidding, she had a daily behavior chart. And every day, we would go to these monthly meetings, and I have twin daughters. And so anytime she would act out, this was in first grade. Anytime she would act out, it all started in kindergarten. She had a teacher who had never taught kindergarten before, had used to teach like fourth grade, and was not comfortable with the weird things that kindergartners would do. So every class she would get like a tally if she misbehaved in any class, and if it was anything particularly bad, the teacher would write a note. And every day Chloe would bring this home and I would have to sign off on it. And they would make graphs of her number of disruptions over time, her number of disruptions in different classes. It turns out in her specials where things were very unstructured, those were her challenging times. If a student was misbehaving, she still is kind of like the arbiter of justice, and like she would discipline the student as though she were not six. So one time her principal talked to me actually in one of the meetings, he looked at me and he was like, well, you have to know that like something is wrong with her, right? Because like you have this other kid and she doesn't do any of these things. And I was like, there's nothing, what? First of all, they're different. We don't compare kids. They're just different. It was
What is wrong with you,
right.
sir? Yeah.
So some of the recommendations that they had come up with is they wanted Chloe to wear like a weighted vest when she was in the hallways, and to carry
To slow her
a
down.
giant encyclopedia to tire her out. And I was like, this is I'm telling you, this is not the 1950s. This was when you were in college. In fact, it probably was then. So I resisted all of those things, and eventually Chloe got a diagnosis, and she's been on medication ever since. And by the end of second grade, we were done with the daily behavior charts, which was very exciting. There was no more conversation about carrying encyclopedias. And I mean, she did act up. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, she would spit on kids when she got mad. Like, she had no impulse control, which is like ADHD, right? So fast forward to like 11th grade, and I got an email that she was like student of the quarter, and her teacher wrote this letter that got sent home about how Chloe was just the best kid, and how she cared so much about like her classmates, and how she stuck up for kids who were being bullied. And I sat there at this breakfast eating like a weirdly good scone to be made by a high school cafeteria. And I was just crying because I was like, my God, how does the kid who was spitting on kids and needed a weighted vest, how does that kid become like the most caring kid in school? And it was like, because she had support from her teachers, and she had medical care from her doctor, and that we never stopped thinking that she could be that kid.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to even overlook the support from like parents either, like thinking about what you were able to do and just having that network, I think is really important.
I wasn't always great though. Like I was a kid who
Yeah,
never got in trouble at school, and I was like, "How is this kid, my kid, bringing home?" I never got yelled at, and when I did, I would cry. Like I was.
same. It's probably how we ended up
I
valedictorian.
know. I think there's something to that for sure. But anyway, that was. But I think that ties back to growth mindset. That high
Hmm.
standards and high support.
Hmm.
In terms of like if you don't have the resources to help a student continue to like chip away, whether that looks like tutoring or like social networks or office hours when they're like useful, or like, you know, resources, educational resources, I
Hmm.
think that can take the wind out of a kid's sails. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the other things I had on here, and then maybe we can even just talk about some like language examples
Sure.
too. But one of the things that I found was about like to kind of help showing growth mindset in a classroom, celebrating small achievements was one of the things
Yes.
that I found. Like thinking about, or even like effort and follow through, like just celebrating that aspect of it, like
Yes.
as part of the process. And that's something that I think I do when I put up some clicker questions or like some voting card questions,
Yep.
or we have a conversation and I'll be like, if you got to this part, like you're good. If even if you didn't get the whole thing right, like if you can understand
Yep.
the signs right now and you got the right sign for it or you got the right value, like you're in a good spot for where we want to be right now. And just acknowledging that and kind of like I think that helps with that kind of growth mindset and that persistence.
Totally. We do similar things in geology. So our students are not always, you have probably some of the more academically strong students because a lot of your students have like gone through calculus.
Survived
Yes,
calculus,
survived
yeah.
calculus. Yes. But we'll have, so I think a lot of students are surprised when they're really used to getting great grades. And then a lot of times in science classes, like C means average. And I'll take time after like a first test or two to be like, hey, if you got a C on this test, like that means that like you pretty much know what's going on. Like you understand things. You're being successful right now, and as you learn more and more levels of detail and refinement, like that's what a B looks like, and that's what an A looks like. But a C from where like in our classes is like that means good. That means good. That means you get it, and we can work from there. But I think sometimes things that aren't A's can be jarring to students.
Yeah. Then the nice thing for me too with my exams is that the first one is like one-dimensional motion, which is not challenging. And so they can kind of ease their way into not doing well and then like get better with the retakes.
Fair enough.
So like it kind of sets up that structure of like, okay, the first one wasn't so bad. The second one's going to be more tough.
Yep.
So it's okay if you don't do as well. Like that's what the retakes are for. And just kind of I actually show them like the data that I have. Like I have graphs set up, which you've seen,
Yep.
right? Of like previous semesters where it's the horizontal axis is the original test grade and then the vertical axis is like the grade for the students after the retake, and you can see that motion upward, right,
Yes.
from that shows like, hey, these past students have been able to like improve, and like this is the number of them that were able to move up over that C mark, over a 70.
Yep.
So it's doable, right? Just showing them that it's doable, that you can not do well initially and then still be able to improve.
Totally. Totally. So one of the things that we have to do pretty regularly in geology, which I don't know that everyone does this still in the field, but we spend a lot of time doing sketches, whether it's in a paleontology lab or out in the field doing a good field sketch.
You just come up with bits and then you just act them out. Is that it?
Field, oh, like a comedy sketch? No, like drawing.
Oh, okay.
We have to draw specimens. We have to draw field settings, and invariably there will be someone who's like, I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist. And I say every time, you don't have to be. And we teach like a 8 to 10 day field class, and without exception, every student in the last decade that we've been teaching it gets better every time. Like, and you can
Hmm.
see that in a week. And the reason we do field sketch, the students will be like, can I just take a picture? And no is the answer, because when you're doing a field sketch, you have to slow down. It makes you see things that you didn't notice before.
Hmm.
It makes you like notice patterns that if you're just taking a picture and keep it moving, like you just don't see. And students will laugh and be like, sorry, when they hand in their sketches. But with enough feedback that you get from in our field class, we'll actually grade their field notebooks and give them back to them like the next day and be like, hey, we gave you 15 minutes to do this, and it looks like a couple triangles with the circular sun in the sky. Let's did you notice this? Did you notice this? And we'll practice it before we like get on location, because when you're
Yeah.
in a field setting, like, you never know, there could be a bison there, there could be like, it could be 100 degrees, there's lots of distracting factors in the field, but it's important skill to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about providing feedback to students as a way of
Yes.
communicating a growth mindset. One of the things that I will try and do is make comments like nice improvements, or I can see how much you've grown. Like, I can see how you're applying the things that we've learned, because like that kind of stuff, rather than just saying like, good job, like you're a great student, like taking that emphasis off of like them being a great student and being on like, you have like connecting it back to the process
Yes.
that they've gone through to learn.
I think that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thinking about it as like growing, you're growing your math brain when you're growing your physics brain when you're doing hard problems, right? You're growing this aspect of that. Like your brain is, you've got a little extra side brain that's like a little kombucha SCOBY that you're just
I don't
growing.
know
And
what that means.
no, so people who make kombucha have to like have this thing that looks like some sort of skin flap or something that sits in its own liquid. I don't know what to
Oh
tell you. It's yeast.
God.
It's yeast. Like they're basically just growing some sort of yeast body that's separate.
I would like to put
Google some stuff.
skin flap on our no word list. I
You'll
can't,
be saying it next week.
I can't imagine a situation where skin flap comes up that isn't connected to like
I
a
don't think
field injury.
I think if it looks like a skin flap, you're doing a bad job
Oh, without
of keeping
question.
your SCOBY alive, because you have to keep like the yeast alive or something like that. I don't know, but just thinking about like you're growing like this aspect of it. Like when you are experiencing a challenge, like the fact that you feel like you're struggling means that you are growing.
Yes, that's true. So it's hard when you have a room full of students who are all different levels, to provide learning opportunities that is like a little bit beyond their comfort zone, right? Because
Hmm.
learning is interesting, because if you make it too easy, then students get bored and disengage. But if you make it too hard, similar things happen. It feels
Hmm.
insurmountable. So it's like finding that sweet spot where they're challenged enough that they're curious, and they're like, they want to solve something, and it feels solvable.
And you can grow their comfort zone a little bit.
Yes, and you can
Yeah.
make them be comfortable with being uncomfortable a little bit.
Hmm.
A little bit. So what do you say when things don't go well? Those are
What do
very
you mean?
so those are things always go well except when you're crocheting. What do you say when things don't go well?
I do kind of really, I did kind of mean, what do you mean a little bit? Like in what context?
So, like, let's say you have a student who has historically done really well and
Mm.
then falls off the wagon, let's say.
And then like wants to talk about it kind of thing?
Yeah, or let's say you have a class, like in your have certain high standards for your class, and
Sure.
then like they drop the ball. Things don't go well on a quiz.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I do is when I see students not doing well on exams, like I will write a note on the top like that, hey, let me know if you want me to help. Let me know where I can help you
Okay.
prepare for XYZ. And I write that on the top
Yeah.
of their exam, and then it's kind of like, okay, reach out, like they got to reach out to me. But like some of them do, and we'll have like a conversation about how do we approach this. Like, what do we need to do to come at this from a different direction? How are you thinking about this right now? It's possible that we just have to adjust our mindset because we're still learning to learn like physicists
Yeah,
and think like physicists, and you're not necessarily kind of coming in with that. And so we need to think about how we're adjusting how we approach things. And I think that would be a piece of that. In terms of if we have a quiz that doesn't go well, like with the class as a whole, I think we still kind of have that conversation, and I will go over some problems with them, and we'll kind of talk about it. One of the things that I also try to do when we're working through problems in class is have the conversation, because often if there's no questions, I will be like, well, where do you think you would go wrong if you were doing this on your own?
oh, fun.
And that gets students to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And like that usually will generate a couple questions. I'm like, what do you think you would forget if you were doing this for an assignment? And so that kind of like lets me hit on some of the things that they would need.
That's fun.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's important. So I think it's important when we talk about things that don't go well with students that we can reinforce the idea that we know that they can do it,
Yeah.
right? And that we say, you know what, it's going to be hard. And this might be challenging, and
Hmm.
sometimes these things aren't going to come to you immediately, but you can do it. And I've seen you do this, and maybe you haven't seen them do this, but like you know that they can do it.
I actually had an interaction with a student like that today.
Did you?
I was talking with another instructor about some coding stuff, which is actually a place where I do struggle. So I'll come back to that
Oh,
because I was like,
coding
oh,
and
yeah,
crocheting.
oh. uh, I was talking with them, and the student comes out, and they're like, this other instructor is really trying to do us in,
Oh,
and we were both like, what? And they're like, they told us that this instructor said there's only 8 questions on the final, and then laughed. The instructor laughed,
that's not nice.
and I was like, and the student was like, I think that means it's going to be really hard. That's, and just them saying like, I've had a really tough time with this class, and it's a student that I've had before, and just me saying like, you can do it, like I know you have what it takes,
Yeah.
was enough for like the student to just be like, thank you. And like I could see the shift in like their face of like how they were thinking about things, and their kind of perspective going forward.
That's fun. So one of the things that we were talking about earlier was asset versus deficit based thinking.
Sure.
So we have enough students who have gone through like personal trauma that I think that is completely outside of the realm of academics, right?
Hmm.
And so actually you and I have like talked to a few of them in the focus group interviews we've been doing lately. I think students don't give themselves enough credit
Oh,
for
100%.
right for like the personal trauma that they've been able to manage and
Hmm.
process and still then go on and be like super successful, or even, and sometimes success doesn't mean like getting an A. Sometimes success means like finishing something that you thought
That
you were just going to walk away from.
that was exactly the conversation that I had with them today, right? If
Yeah,
at first you don't succeed, redefine success and celebrate your victory.
right. Those stackable wins.
But I've had that discussion with students too, and that's a big thing for me is that I've dealt with a lot of stuff, a lot of things when I was like back in grad school, and just acknowledging that like I've been through worse stuff, I will probably be fine.
Yes.
Like I just have to I there is another side to this because I've been through worse stuff and there was another side to that.
Yes.
Or I've been through anything and there was another side to that. And just I think that helps students a lot when I'm talking to them when they're in the midst of their trauma.
Yeah.
It just kind of like there is another side to this, and then you're going to be able to just use that as fuel for the rest of your life. Like you've gotten through something that was challenging, and so you're able to do that and keep doing that.
So I teach online classes pretty regularly, and one of the things I sometimes struggle with is how to effectively use discussion forums
Mhm.
in online STEM classes. And one of the things that I'm thinking about doing, if not for the summer, then for the fall, is to really change the way I use discussion forums, where I have students talk about whether it's like the way that they prepare for an exam. One of the things I was thinking about doing was to teach them a little bit in a discussion forum about like brain plasticity and the idea that
Mm.
your brain is not fixed and it is always growing and changing,
Mhm.
and give some examples of stories of folks who have been able to like grow, like all the
Mhm.
stories we've been talking about today, and then in the forum ask for, not necessarily for people to open your veins and tell me your deepest trauma, but give me an example of like a time when you needed to overcome something and how did you do it and what skills did you use.
I think you could even just focus that on classes to avoid students feeling the need to share their trauma.
But
Like,
what if
so,
students are
yeah,
not successful and have not historically been successful at classes? Because we've had those students. I guess I could give them the option. So then, whether it's in
sure.
school or in life, what's something you've overcome?
I think the fact that they've made it to you, like, is enough of a like testament to the fact that they were able to succeed at something.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah,
Well, I think one of the things that I struggle with in online classes is the lack of connection, both with me
sure.
and students and with students with one another.
Hmm.
So I'm really thinking about using all of those discussion forums going forward as a way for them to connect about stuff that has nothing to do necessarily with the content, but has to do with like them as students or them as
Hmm.
people. Because I think I was just actually writing about this in our stupid accreditation report. It's called regular and substantive interactions,
You're gonna have to cut out stupid.
because we're going to pass this accreditation with flying colors. But this endless accreditation process. But it cracks me up that there's like an abbreviation for that, RSI, regular and substantive interactions. It's like, how can we quantify being humans? That's really what it is. Right?
Hmm.
But I think that that is something that I'm going to take away from our talk today and use going forward.
I like that.
Thanks for helping me redesign my class today.
Hey, always happy. I tell this to my students too. Always happy to help by not doing anything.
That's the best way to help.
I know. I love when they come to talk to me and start explaining what their problem is, and then they're like, "Oh, I figured it out." I'm like,
You're welcome.
"You did. You got it. You're welcome."
That's so true.
Yeah,
Oh my god. Have we
that's
both
where.
run out of content? Go ahead. No.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Oh,
Perfect.
yeah, I think this is a good end.
I agree. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today on Coffee Break Classroom. And oh, don't forget to send us some of your office hour stories. We can't wait to hear from you.
That's true. If you didn't do it immediately after the last episode, this is your reminder that we asked you for that, and
That's your
it's due coming.
that's your homework. Coffeebreakclassroom@gmail.com. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Oh, where's the stop button? Every time. You think I'd be better at this by now?
It's